is very clear that Africa is the most resource abundant and fastest growing in the world. Every country in Africa has something to boast about as a factor of economic and socio-cultural development. For this reason, some of its countries have grown rapidly with increasing numbers of high net worth individuals, businesses, and expertise in various domains that have made them very wealthy today. GDP is an instrument used to measure all of the country's output as well as its wealth status. It is a vital indicator of a country's ability to provide its citizens with comfortable and fascinating standards of living. With a nominal GDP of $504.2 billion, Nigeria is the richest country in Africa due to its human potential, abundance of natural resources, and its GDP in purchasing power parity of $1.3 billion, which is the second largest in the continent. Despite a per capita gross domestic product far below pre-independence levels, Nigeria remains the continent's most populous and main oil producer. Although Nigeria is Africa's strongest economic power, its economic structure is akin to that of many other nations on the continent. 2/3 of the population now live below the absolute poverty level of $1 per day, up from 43% in 1985. Most of Nigeria's economic development is concentrated in the south, while the center and north are less developed, with the majority of economic activity occurring in the coastal zone, particularly around Lagos. Nigeria is blessed with so much natural resources such as coal, petroleum, rock salt, iron ore, gemstone, diamond, gypsum, talc, clay, lead, gold, zinc, oil and gas, limestone, lignite, barite, bentonite, dolomite, marble, amongst others. Occupying Northeast Africa and divided by the lush Nile River Valley, Egypt is the leading economic force on the African continent in terms of GDP PPP, with a gross domestic product of $469.1 billion and the second richest country in Africa. Its economy was largely centralized under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, but it was liberalized under President Anwar Sadat and Hosni Mubarak due to tough reforms. Egypt reforms an economic openness program undertaken between 2006 and 2008 to attract international investment and drive development, helped the country attain high record annual growth rate of 7%, catapulting it into the ranks of Africa's richest nations. Considering the country's arid environment, the majority of human and economic activity is centered near the Nile, and its economy, unlike that of many African nations, is diverse and the largest in North Africa. In addition to the agricultural capacity of Nile River and Delta, Egypt's natural resources include petroleum, honey, natural gas, phosphates, and iron ore. Crude oil is found primarily in the Gulf of Suez and in the Western Desert. South Africa, the most industrialized and technologically sophisticated nation on the continent, is the third richest country in Africa with a gross domestic product of $411.5 billion. It features a two-speed economy with one sector on par with industrialized nations and another in severe need of basic infrastructure. Although the natural resource extraction industry, particularly chromium, manganese, gold, and platinum, remains one of the biggest in the country, contributing $13.5 billion annually to the country's gross domestic product. South Africa's economy has diversified since the end of apartheid, particularly in the services sector. In 2019, the financial sector of South Africa contributed $41.4 billion to the country's gross domestic product, and by 2021, South African financial institutions were handling more than $1.4 trillion in assets. The fact that many Africans travel to South Africa to make more money than in their native countries is one of the country's claim to fame as one of Africa's richest nations. Algeria is one of the continent's primary oil and gas producers and the continent's third economic power in terms of GDP PPP and the fourth richest country in Africa, with a gross domestic product of $187.1 billion. Like many OPEC countries, Algeria is extremely reliant on its oil exports and worldwide market volatility. Since gaining independence in 1962, Algeria has established a dense industrial base through significant economic initiatives, notwithstanding enormous accomplishments in forms of roads, highways, colleges, hospitals, industries, metro tramways, etc. which now cements its position as one of the richest countries in Africa. The Algerian economy has gone through a number of turbulent phases. Although Algeria is the richest country in Maghreb, its economy remains extremely reliant on oil and gas earnings, which are the country's primary source of income. The nation has been unsuccessful in diversifying its economy and creating a globally competitive manufacturing base. The Kingdom of Morocco is a market economy that has developed an average annual rate of 4% over the previous decade, with a projected GDP of $142.9 billion in 2022. Making it the 5th richest country in Africa. The automobile industry with 28.5%, the agricultural and agri-food sector with 21.8%, and phosphate, of which Morocco has the world's largest deposits, are the country's 3 primary export industries. Tourism, which accounts for 7% of the country's GDP, contributes significantly to Morocco's status as one of the richest countries in Africa. It is the source of around 550 direct jobs, which support several million people. In August 2022, tourists to Morocco generated an all-time high of $1.5 billion in income. The European Union is Morocco's largest partner, accounting for 53.1% of imports and 66.7% of exports. Spain, 15.6%, France, 12.0%, and China, 10%. Are the top 3 nations that supply Morocco. With an economy highly reliant on the extraction and sale of natural commodities such as oil and mineral, Angola is the 6th richest country in Africa with a GDP of $124.8 billion. Despite 4 decades of independence and civil conflict, economic development skyrocketed between 2002 and 2016, averaging 9% in the period leading up to 2008. On the one hand, Angola's economy is characterized by its vast economic potential, and on the other hand, by its recovery from the lengthy civil conflict that afflicted the country from 1975 to 2002. According to the available data, the oil wealth is concentrated among a few members of the political elites, while the bulk of the populace lives in abject poverty. Kenya, the only lower middle income nation in East Africa, according to the World Bank, is the 7th richest country in Africa with a GDP of $114.9 billion. The government maintains an open foreign economic exchange system and a market economy with a few state-owned firms. The primary economic sectors are agriculture, forestry, mining, manufacturing, energy, tourism, and financial services. Kenya, the richest country in East Africa, has sub-Saharan Africa's 3rd largest economy after only Nigeria and South Africa. With one of the highest GDP growth rates in the world at over 10% per year, Ethiopia is the 8th richest country in Africa with a GDP of $111.2 billion. Its remarkable GDP growth has allowed a substantial section of the population to transcend severe poverty, dropping from 55.5% in 1999 to 26.7% in 2016. Drought, food shortages, and political disputes have hampered Ethiopia's agricultural economy, but the country is rapidly moving to an industrial and exporting economy. Despite being the richest country in the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia is not a member of the World Trade Organization, although a membership process was initiated in 2003. Ethiopia has a sizable public sector, with the government privatizing several state-owned enterprises and gradually moving toward a market economy. Yet, the state retains control over the banking, telecommunication, and transportation industries. In addition to being one of the richest African countries, Ethiopia is the 2nd most populated nation on the continent and has one of the fastest growing economies in the world. High reliance on the energy sector, oil, and large military expenditure continue to weaken the economy, which varies greatly depending on the region of the nation in question. A country heavily reliant on agricultural processing and certain consumer goods, Tanzania is the 9th richest country in Africa with a GDP of $76.6 billion. Agriculture accounts for a quarter of the country's gross domestic output, employs around 80% of the labor force, and accounts for approximately 85% of exports. Although one of the richest countries in Africa, Tanzania's economy is in many ways typical of a developing nation, with a nearly non-existent and uncompetitive industrial base. However, tourism is an increasingly important source of foreign cash. Tanzania's mineral resources include gold, diamond, iron, coal, nickel, tanzanite, uranium, natural gas, and offshore natural gas reserves. While the government retains a presence in the telecommunication, banking, energy, and mining industry, the transition to a market economy has almost been completed. Ghana, a prominent petroleum and natural gas producer with the 6th largest crude oil reserves in Africa and the 25th largest in the world, is the 10th richest country in Africa with a GDP of $76 billion. Ghana has poultry, fish, and beef, but agriculture, particularly cocoa and gold, contributes about half of the country's GDP. Cocoa and its derivatives, which typically account for 2/3 of exports, are farmers' primary sources of revenue. Ghana is also a producer of lumber, palm oil, coconut, and other palm goods, and shea, which is also used to extract edible fats and coffee. In addition to these traditional goods, Ghana has included other agricultural items such as pineapple, cashew nuts, black pepper, yams, cassava, and bananas, which have enhanced its position as one of the richest countries in Africa. Manganese, bauxite, and diamonds are available in commercial amounts in Ghana, but gold is the largest commercially exploited resource, accounting for over 95% of the country's mining earnings. Hence, the colonial name Gold Coast. While one of the richest countries in Africa, Ghana's industrial sector, which accounts for around 10% of its GDP, is undeveloped and is plagued by several inefficiencies. Ghana's status as one of the Africa's wealthiest nations has been bolstered by the emergence of tourism as one of the country's primary sources of revenue in recent years, prompting the government to place a significant focus on fostering the expansion of this industry. Oka Blessing, reporting from Adamazi TV.